What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be comparing the TCL Stylus 5G to the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get started. So with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.81-inch IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 395, an aspect ratio of 20.5 by 9, and a 90.2% screen to body ratio. With the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, we're getting a 6.49-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 405, an aspect ratio of 20 by 9, and an 83.7% screen to body ratio. So in general, these displays are really good and they're actually pretty similar. On one hand, with the TCL Stylus 5G, obviously this display is much larger, and it also has slightly better dimensions with a taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something in landscape mode, like watching a video for example, you're gonna get a more immersive experience. And if you're scrolling like on social media or something, you can fit more content on this display without having to scroll as much. And meanwhile, on the other hand, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G has a higher refresh rate with a 90Hz display versus the TCL Stylus 5G's standard 60Hz display. The movement on the screen with this phone is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. Now, you probably can't really tell the difference here, but when you're actually using the phones, you will see a little bit if you're doing something like watching a video, playing a game, something where there's a lot of motion on the screen. You will get a slightly better experience with a higher refresh rate, and it's going to feel a little bit more premium when you're just navigating through the phone in general. But I will say, despite this, the difference isn't really huge, so I do think having a larger display with better dimensions does outweigh this. Now, as far as storage goes, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the OnePlus Nord N200 5G is getting 64GB with microSD card expansion as well. So clearly here, the TCL Stylus 5G does have a huge advantage. Having doubled the storage of the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, you'll be able to fit a lot more stuff on this phone. So if you're a power user, if you have a bunch of apps, photos and videos, that kind of stuff, then the TCL Stylus 5G is probably going to be a better choice. But if you're more of a casual user, if you don't have a ton of apps, then even 64GB should be okay. And again, both phones do also have microSD card expansion, so if you have a bunch of photos and videos, for example, you can always offload that stuff onto a microSD card with these phones, and that's going to save you some space. Now for security features, both phones have fingerprint scanners right here on the power keys, definitely a nice spot for them, and they both have face unlock as well. So starting with the TCL Stylus 5G, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And moving on to the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were pretty fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones also do have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the TCL Stylus 5G for the front-facing camera, we got a nice looking hole punch design right in the center, and this camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, we got another hole punch for the front-facing camera, this one being in the left corner instead of centered, and this camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as camera setups go, I would say both phones are pretty good, but between the two, the TCL Stylus 5G definitely has an advantage. First of all, this phone does have an ultra-wide camera, whereas again, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G doesn't. And in addition to this, I would say overall, the photo quality with the TCL Stylus 5G is a little bit better. So if you're taking a lot of photos, you want a wider variety of features, and you just want higher photo quality in general, I would say the TCL Stylus 5G is probably going to be the best choice between the two. But that being said, if you're just a casual camera user, if you're really just taking a couple photos here and there, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G is still going to be at least decent. And then for video, it's the same kind of thing. As far as resolution goes, both phones do max out at 1080p at 30 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras. But between the two, the TCL Stylus 5G, while not being the best quality out there, is still going to have slightly better video quality than the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. But that being said, if you want to see actual photo and video samples for either of these phones, again, I will be linking to several other videos about them, including their full reviews in the video description, so definitely check that out as well. Now as far as RAM and processor go, both of these phones are getting 4GB of RAM. With the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor, and with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, we're getting the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. Now I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a single core score of 560 and a multi-core score of 1755. And with the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, we're getting a single core score of 510 and a multi-core score of 1600. So as you can see here clearly between the two, the TCL Stylus 5G is a little bit faster, but I do want to put some emphasis on a little bit because in reality, when you're actually using the phones, you're probably not going to see a huge difference in performance. Yeah, again, the TCL Stylus 5G is a little bit faster, and for more high performance activities like mobile gaming, for example, you might notice it run a little bit smoother, but in general, I would say they're around the same level. These two phones are both about at the point where you're not going to see any major differences in performance unless you go to something like a flagship phone, like for example, a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, Google Pixel 6a, something like that that's more of an entry-level flagship phone. In that case, you would see a difference, but between these two, again, I'm not saying you're not going to notice any difference because the TCL Stylus 5G is a little bit faster, but just keep in mind that while this may be the case, the performance difference between these two really isn't as big as you might think, and the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, while not being quite as fast, is still not slow by any means. In general, for regular daily use, stuff like web browsing, social media, streaming videos, and the occasional mobile gaming here and there, either phone will be perfectly fine for those activities. Now, as far as the battery goes, with the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging, and with the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging as well. So obviously the OnePlus does have a much larger battery here, so if battery life and longevity is important to you, then definitely keep this in mind because this phone will have a huge advantage. But if you're not too concerned with battery life, maybe you keep your phone plugged in all day anyway, then just know that while the TCL Stylus 5G isn't going to be nearly as good battery wise as the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, in my experience the battery has been pretty decent on this phone, and if battery life isn't like an ultra high priority for you, the TCL Stylus 5G will be okay. Another thing to know is that both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, keep in mind that you can do that with either phone. In addition to this, as far as these other features go, the TCL Stylus 5G, as the name suggests, obviously does have a stylus, whereas the OnePlus Nord N200 5G of course does not. Now, the stylus on the TCL Stylus 5G isn't something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra stylus. You're not going to be able to actually draw or do anything like that, but for just taking handwritten notes here and there, navigating through your home screens, or maybe playing Angry Birds or something, the stylus on this phone will get the job done just fine. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, despite both phones being pretty good for what they are, I personally like the TCL Stylus 5G a little bit better. Despite only having a standard 60Hz refresh rate, I would say the display on this phone is better than the OnePlus Nord N200 5G in pretty much every other way. We're also getting 128GB of internal storage here versus only 64 with the OnePlus, and the TCL Stylus 5G also has a slightly more powerful processor and a better camera setup as well. But on the other hand, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G again is not a bad phone, and it does have a lot of the same features the TCL Stylus 5G has. And again, one major advantage this phone has over the TCL Stylus 5G is the battery. With a 5000 mAh battery, if you're really concerned about battery life, this is definitely going to be a great thing for you. And in addition to this, down the road as the batteries wear out, since the OnePlus Nord N200 5G does have a much larger battery, this one is going to last quite a bit longer. But at the end of the day, despite their differences, I do think both phones are great devices that you're really not going to go wrong with. But this concludes my comparison between the TCL Stylus 5G and the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability because this is always changing. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next one.